Ambassador Rae, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
I just wanted to start off by asking, what has Canada seen that convinced you this was the right decision?
Well, really, there's two things. The first thing is what we've seen is what everybody's seen, which is that the humanitarian situation on the ground in Gaza is appalling, and it's desperate. People are not getting any food, not getting health assistance. Kids are dying. It's a very, very serious situation. And I think that's the priority of the Canadian government, is the priority of all governments trying different ways in which to reach people and to make a difference. The second is that we're satisfied that the UN has begun to do what is necessary to do to ensure that there's a better coordination and that there's better assurances with respect to the security of all of the aid that's being delivered. But it also, frankly, requires a much higher degree of cooperation from the government of Israel to allow us to go forward. And we can't afford to wait for the length of time that it's taking for some of this information to be shared. And we want to make sure that the humanitarian issues come first. And that's why we've made the decision. And that's why we've made it in the way that we've made it, to say that we will be responding to the humanitarian situation with a number of announcements and a number of ways of cooperating with other countries and doing other activities. But we will also be making it very clear that UNRWA, for the time being, has to be part of whatever it is that we do. And that's what the minister announced today.
Now, the original accusation was that at least a dozen people, but as much as 10% of UNRWA was linked to Hamas. Do you know for sure that that isn't the case? And is that why Canada is moving forward today?
Frankly, information is coming out from the government of Israel, dribs and drabs. First it was 12, then we get another number, then we find, and the UN has tried to get to the bottom, saying, well, who are these people? Does that conform to the list that UNRWA has, etc.? And to this point, Israel has not yet met with the investigating team that was established at the end of January, and here we are now in March. Israel has not yet met with that team. And so, frankly, we have to move. We can't maintain a situation where we're not able to keep funding what requires to be funded while we wait. And we therefore say, look, we're satisfied that the UN is taking any allegation very seriously. They issued letters of dismissal to the 12 that were named. And we're going to continue to work with the government of Israel, to work with UNRWA, to work with the UN, to get to the bottom of what happened. But we can't allow all of that investigatory work to get in the way of our humanitarian need. The priority has to be on dealing with a situation that is as bad in Gaza as it is anywhere else in the world. And the humanitarian situation globally is terrible. So we have to respond, and that's the way we're responding. I think it strikes the right balance. I think it's taking everybody's views into account, but it's also giving the priority to people, and in particular to the most needy and most desperate of people that we need to do. And so that's what we're doing.
And I understand the balance that you're trying to really strike there, but I guess what I'm asking is, what confidence do Canadians have that the money that's going to UNRWA isn't also going to an organization like Hamas, whose sole goal is really to wipe out Israel?
Well, that is not happening in the way in which you've suggested that it might be happening. All of the
with respect, Ambassador, how do we know that? If we only have the interim report, what can you say to Canadians right now to ensure that that's not happening?
Well, we're doing everything we can to make sure that it's not happening. And we will continue to do that. But everyone, again, I just would plead with you to think for a moment. Most of the people who work for all of the humanitarian agencies are Palestinians. And they're Palestinians living in Gaza. They're civilians. And none of them are supposed to be doing anything else. But whether you give your money to the World Food Program or anyone else, you need to understand that it's the civilian population of Gaza that is taking what's there and distributing it. We're doing everything we can that's humanly possible to ensure the security of whatever assistance we provide. But it would be, in my opinion, morally wrong for us to say, until we're absolutely satisfied, we're not going to respond to the humanitarian situation in the way that we normally would. And we have to understand, people are on the edge of starvation. Gaza is on the edge of famine. And for us not to respond to that in a responsible way is, I just think, wrong. And I think the government feels the same way, Mr. Trudeau feels the same way, and we're all agreed that this is the step that we now need to take. And there will be criticism, but I would plead with everybody who's criticizing, tell us how else we're going to be able to respond to a profound humanitarian crisis where 2.2 million people are living in the most dire and appalling of circumstances. We have to respond to that.
Yeah, and I take your point, but the U.S. isn't reversing course. Why are they focused on a water route and not UNRWA? Is there something that you know that they don't?
Well, what I do know is that the Republican Party doesn't control the Parliament of Canada.
I mean, that's fair, but their focus on that.
It's accurate. It's accurate. No, you need to understand that there's political situations in every country that decides for their own reasons not to respond, and they have found other ways. And the United States will try to find other ways, and they have 10 times larger population and larger donor capacity than we have. But we're not going to let politics get in the way of the humanitarian decisions that we need to make. We can't let that happen.
I take that point, but I also want to ask you about the political pressure here at home. I mean, there have been liberal fundraisers and the dinner with the Prime Minister of Italy, Giorgia Meloni. All of this was railroaded by people that are accusing your government of being part of a genocide. Does that factor in this at all as well?
Not at all. I think your listeners would know that I've been around the politics for a long time. I've also faced large demonstrations for over my career. It happens. There will be protests. There will be demonstrations. That cannot determine the decisions of a government. The decisions that this government is making is being made because we need to respond to a humanitarian crisis. And I don't think Canadians are, in their heart of hearts, I don't think Canadians have wanted any other way.
So I wanted to ask you, what oversights are being put in place to give the Canadian government assurances that none of the money and none of this aid is actually going to Hamas?
Well, the first is that don't get into all the technical points, but we have asked for, and UNRWA has agreed to, an extremely stringent set of accountability measures, enhanced accountability measures, in terms of how they're structured now and how they're going forward. We have a review that's being headed up by the former Foreign Minister of France, Madame Colonna, and she is doing work on, at the request of the Secretary General, what can we do to deal with a situation where aid is being delivered in circumstances such as we see at the present time in places like Gaza, but in particular in Gaza. We have the continuing efforts to the investigation group in the United Nations to be able to meet with the Israeli government. We've been trying to get that meeting over the last 6 weeks. We're still waiting for the meeting to take place. There's been a substantial delay in allowing that meeting to go forward. And we're also working with all of the donors to make it very clear to everybody that we're going to take every possible step we can to ensure that that there is no evidence of this kind of corruption. The diversion of services to a terrorist group is not on. It should not happen, and we must take every possible step we can take to ensure that it doesn't happen. But the actual allegation that has been made with respect to the individuals is that they participated in the October 7th atrocities, and that is a crime. That is a crime of the highest order, and that's not something that we would tolerate or accept either. But just to come back, I want to emphasize this point because I think it's so critical. We can't we can't allow the debates about what happened and didn't happen to get in the way of what do we now have to do. Because what's happening now is a catastrophe from a humanitarian perspective. And for us to say, well, we're just going to hold back because we haven't been able to cross every T and dot every I, I think that's a mistake. We're taking the measures. The United Nations is taking the measures. We're taking additional measures. The EU is putting in new audit measures. Every donor is putting in new measures, including us. And we're going to continue to pay attention to all of that. But at the same time, we have to pay attention to the humanitarian crisis.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to ask you, speaking of that humanitarian crisis, we know that aid getting in is most effectively delivered by road. We know that that has been very difficult. We also know that Minister Hussein has announced that they sort of teaming up with the Jordanian government to try and help do that. What efforts are being made by the Canadian government and allies to ensure that there are better routes in for aid and that it doesn't have to continue to be airdrops?
Well, we're working closely with the government of Israel, first of all. I had a number of meetings this week with a woman named Sigrid Kaag, who's been appointed, former Dutch finance minister, who's been appointed by the Secretary General to coordinate the discussions with the Israeli government. We're heavily involved in that, as is obviously our embassies in the region, in Egypt, in Israel, in Jordan. Minister Jolie will be in Israel in a couple of days. She'll have an opportunity to, I know, to talk with the Israeli government about how we can improve the delivery of aid. We need 500 trucks a day, and we don't have anywhere near that at the moment. And we need it to get to the people who need it the most, and we need it yesterday. And that's, I think, why people are turning to all the other methods that we use. But we know that the fundamental best way of getting the assistance in is through the crossings that are established between Israel and Egypt, and between Israel and Gaza, and between Gaza and Egypt. And we need to make those entrances work, and we need to make those entrances work more efficiently. We need to make sure that we've got the best scanners going, that we're doing everything we can to ensure the safety and security of those supplies. And also in distribution, we have to dramatically improve the system of distribution so that the assistance is getting to the people who need it, and so that the assistance cannot be diverted. And we are involved in a comprehensive international effort to do that and to make it happen. And right now, we can't make that happen without UNRWA. And so it would be, I think, it would be wrong of us to say, we're not going to give any money to UNRWA. And then you get into the technicalities of, well, if we give it to the food program, is some of that going to go to UNRWA? And you can say, look, we're making this decision. We're making it responsibly and carefully, and we're going to take the steps to do what we think needs to be done.
Ambassador Rae, we're going to have to leave it there. Bob Rae, Canada's ambassador to the United Nations, thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate this.
Thank you, Michael. Good to be with you, too.